Hi there, welcome to Microsoft Azure Training Series. My name is Neeraj Kumar. I am a cloud evangelist and enterprise architect, and I will be your instructor for this course. Hi there, greetings to you. In this module, we will try to understand and implement Azure Backup to help protect the data for on-premises servers, virtual machines, virtualized workloads such as SQL Server or SAP HANA running in Azure VMs, Azure file shares, etc. We will first try to have an introduction to Azure Backups. We will then learn about the features of Azure Backups and try to identify the scenarios for which Azure Backup provides backup and restore capabilities. As a next step, we will have a demo where we will use the Azure Backups to backup an Azure virtual machine, followed by a demo on how to restore the virtual machine's data from that backup. There is quite a bit to cover, so let's get started. So, what is Azure Backup? It is a cloud-based solution that provides simple, secure, and cost-effective solutions to back up your data and recover it from the Microsoft Azure cloud. Although cloud native, it is also possible to use Azure Backup on premises. As already mentioned, Azure Backup is simple to configure and use and offers consistent copies with security features and management controls via the Azure portal. Azure Backup takes point-in-time backups of your data from different sources. It can be Azure VMs, SQL machines in Azure, SAP HANA databases in Azure, files, folders, system state, SQL databases from on-premises, VMware VMs, Hyper-V VMs, and much more. While Azure VMs and the workloads hosted in those VMs are backed up using a backup extension, on-premises workloads can be protected using Microsoft Azure Recovery Services, MARS agent, Azure Backup Server, which is abbreviated as MABS, or through integration with System Center Data Protection Manager, abbreviated as DPM. So Azure Backup backs up your data, but are Azure servers backed up? The answer to the question is yes, they can be. So the servers that are hosted in Azure in IaaS can be protected using Azure Backup. It is simple to enable this backup directly from the Azure portal with minimal configuration overhead. This service can be enabled for both Windows and Linux VMs in Azure. Azure Backups are stored in Azure Storage, right? And which is automatically created by the backup service. As Azure Storage is built on a pay-as-you-go basis, this serves as a very inexpensive backup solution for your data estate in the cloud. Azure Storage is resilient by design, and there will be minimum of 3 copies of your data available in the cloud in Azure Storage when using locally redundant storage, which is abbreviated as LRS. If you want additional resiliency, then for that, the storage is available through geo-redundant storage, GRS, or the zone redundant storage, ZRS. Let us now discuss about the Azure Backup features and scenarios. So both backup and site recovery aim to make the system more resilient to faults and failures. However, while the primary goal of backup is to maintain copies of stateful data that allow you to go back in time, the site recovery replicates the data in almost real time and allows for a failover. In that sense, if there are issues like network or power outages, you can use availability zones. For a region-wide disaster, such as natural disaster, site recovery is used. Backups are used in cases of accidental data loss, data corruption, or ransomware attacks. Additionally, the choice of a recovery approach definitely depends on the criticality of the application, RPO and RTO requirements, and the cost implications. Why use Azure Backups? Now, Azure Backups has several benefits over more traditional backup solutions, such as disk and tape. They don't offer the highest level of integration with cloud-based solutions. The first feature is zero infrastructure backup. One of the key features that Azure Backup provides is that it eliminates the need to deploy and manage any backup infrastructure or storage. This means there is no overhead in maintaining backup servers or scaling the storage up or down as the need vary. We then have the long-term retention. Azure Backup meets the rigorous compliance and audit needs by retaining backups for many years, which can be easily set as per organizational requirements, beyond which the recovery point will be pruned automatically by the built-in lifecycle management capabilities. We then have the security. So Azure Backup provides security to your backup environment both when your data is in transit and at rest. We have the Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, that allows you to segregate roles within your team and grant specific access to users as per necessity. Also, within security, we have encryption of the backups. Backup data is automatically encrypted using Microsoft Managed Keys. Alternatively, you can also encrypt your backup data using customer managed keys stored in the Azure Key Vault. And then no internet connectivity required. When using Azure VMs, all the data transfer happens only on the Azure backbone network without needing to access your virtual network. So, no access to any IPs or fully qualified domain names is required. And then we have the soft delete. With soft delete, the backup data is retained for 14 additional days even after the deletion of the backup item. This protects data against accidental deletion or malicious deletion scenarios, allowing the recovery of those backups with no data loss. Azure Backup also offers the ability to back up virtual machines encrypted with Azure Disk Encryption. The fourth one is the high availability. Azure Backup offers three types of replications: the locally redundant storage, LRS, the GRS, which is the geo-redundant storage, and the RAGRS, which is the read access GRS, to keep your backup data highly available and resilient. Last but not the least, we get the centralized monitoring and management. So the Azure Backup provides built-in monitoring and alerting capabilities in a recovery services vault. And these capabilities are available without any additional management infrastructure. Now let's discuss how to backup Azure VM using Azure Backup. Azure VMs are backed up by taking snapshots of the underlying disks at user-defined intervals and transferring those snapshots to the recovery services vault as per the customer-defined policy. And here comes the recovery services vault, which is a storage entity used by Azure Backup to manage and store the backup data. As I mentioned earlier, that it is a storage management entity that houses the data, and therefore you do not need to worry about deploying or managing storage accounts. It indeed provides a simple experience to manage and monitor backup and restore operations. You just need to specify the vault to back up the VM to. Courtesy to the recovery services vault, the backup data is transferred to the Azure Backup storage accounts in the background. The data is typically copies of data or configuration information for virtual machines, workloads, servers, or workstations. Now let's talk about snapshots, because that is a term that came in between, right? A snapshot is a point in time backup of all the disks on the virtual machine. If we talk about Azure VMs, Azure Backup uses different extensions for each supporting operating system. For Windows, we have VM Snapshot, and for Linux OS, we have VM Snapshot Linux. Now, going back to the recovery services vault, we can define the backup policies for backup frequency and data retention periods. The backups for VMs can be taken daily or weekly and can be retained for multiple years based on the organizational needs. There are two access tiers of the backed up data. One is the snapshot tier. In the snapshot tier, all the snapshots are stored locally for a maximum period of 5 days. For all sorts of operational recoveries, it is always advised that we use the snapshot tier as it is much faster. It is called the instant restore. Then we have the vault tier, where the snapshots are transferred to the vault for added security and longer retention period. Here is how the Azure Backup completes a backup for Azure VMs. For Azure VMs that are selected for backup, Azure Backup starts a backup job according to the backup frequency you specify in the backup policy. During the first backup, a backup extension is installed on the VM if the VM is running. As I mentioned earlier, for Windows VMs, the VM snapshot extension is installed. For Linux VMs, the VM snapshot Linux extension is installed. After the snapshot is taken, it is stored locally as well transferred to the vault. The backup is optimized by backing up each VM disk in parallel. For each disk that's being backed up, Azure Backup reads the blocks on the disk and identifies and transfers only the data blocks that is changed since the previous backup. That's the delta, right? And snapshot data might not be immediately copied to the vault. It might take several hours at peak times. Total backup time for a VM will be less than 24 hours for a daily backup policies. Let us spend some more time in understanding the snapshots as it is very important. The extension for Windows works with VSS, which is the Volume Shadow Copy Service, to take the copy of the data on the disk as well as in the memory. Whereas if we talk about Linux, then the extension for Linux OS, the snapshot is the copy of the disk. Depending on how the snapshot is taken and what it includes, you can achieve different level of consistency. The first one is the application consistent. The snapshot captures the virtual machine as a whole. It uses VSS writers to capture the content of the machine memory and any pending input-output operations. For Linux machines, you will need to write custom pre or post scripts per app to capture the application state. You can get complete consistency for the virtual machine and all running applications. We then have the file system consistent. If VSS fails on Windows or the pre and post script fails on Linux, Azure Backup will still create a file consistent snapshot. During a recovery, no corruption occurs within the machine, but installed application needs to do their own cleanup during startup to become consistent. The third one is crash consistent. This level of consistency typically occurs if the virtual machine is shut down at the time of the backup. No input-output operations or memory contents are captured during this type of backup. This method does not guarantee data consistency for the OS or app. Okay, now it's time to show you a demo on how to back up an Azure virtual machine. In this demo, we will enable the Azure Backup for a Windows virtual machine. You can enable Azure Backup from the Azure portal or using the Azure CLI or even the PowerShell commands. What we are going to do today is to use Azure portal to enable the backup for our Windows machine. Let's get started. So here I am on my Azure portal, and the first thing we are going to do is to create a resource group. So I'll click on the resource group and then click on add. Once I'm there on that page, I'll give it a name, which is ATCSL. And for the location, I'm going to choose Central US. So I'll scroll down, choose Central US as my location, and then finally click on Review plus Create. Once validated, I'll click on Create. This is done quickly and we have our resource group. Next thing we are going to do is to create virtual network. So I'll click on virtual network and then click on add. Again, when we are on the create virtual network page, for me, by default, the subscription comes as pay as you go because that is the only subscription I have. For resource group, I'm going to choose ATCSL, the one that we just created. And for the name, we are going to give it a name of ATCSL VNet. And for me, the location comes as Central US. So I'll leave it as it is and then click on IP addresses. By default, Azure suggests an IP address range of 10.0.0.0/16 and that is good for me. So I will not change anything. And it also provides me a default subnet of 10.0.0.0/24. So I will let remain the default subnet as is. From here, I'll fast forward the video to quickly create the virtual network. So I'll meet you once the virtual network gets created. And here you go, it is done now. So I'll go to the resource, and here I see that I have the address space range that I gave. And if you scroll down under settings, you have subnets. I can click on that and I see that I have a default subnet and I have 251 available IP address range within this private IP address that I can utilize. So what I'm going to do is to create a virtual machine. So I will click on virtual machines, and here on the virtual machines page, I'll click on add virtual machine. Let the subscription remain as is because that's the only subscription I have. For resource group, I'll click on the drop down and select ATCSL. For virtual machine name, I can give it a name of VM1. Scroll down a little. For me, the region comes up as Central US, which is good. The availability option, I will not choose any. And for the image, I'm going to choose a Windows server. So I'll use Windows Server 2019 Data Center Gen 1, and that is what I'm going to choose. And then the size, since this is a demo, I'll choose the smallest size, which is standard DS1v2. I'll give it a username of ATCSL admin and the password. Confirm the password again. And then we have the OS disk type, which is premium SSD. That is fine. The encryption type, if you see, it is encryption at rest with platform managed key. So let us see what other options do we have. We have encryption at rest with a customer managed key, and that is what we were discussing earlier, that if you want the encryption at rest with a customer managed key, we need to use the key vault. And the other one is the encryption at rest with a platform managed key. We are going to use that. So I'll leave this option as is again, and then click on networking. From here, I'll fast forward the video to quickly complete the deployment of the virtual machine. Okay, so the deployment of the virtual machine is complete and I can click on go to resource. I see the VM1 is deployed now. We will scroll down. I'll close this to create more space and I'll give it a name of ATCSL Vault. Resource group, I have just one, which is ATCSL. By default, we have the daily policy. And if you see the backup frequency, it says daily at 12:30 p.m. UTC. And for the retention range, the retention of daily backup point is retain backup taken every day at 12:30 p.m. for 180 days. And that is the default that comes up with this policy. What we can do is we can also create a new policy if you want. Then you can just change the name. The frequency is daily or weekly. And then you can choose the time, you can choose the time zone. And if you want to retain the instant recovery snapshot, you can give the number of days for which the snapshot needs to be retained, and for how many days the retention of daily backup should be there. I'm not going to choose anything. I'll go with the default policy that is created, which is the daily policy, and I will click on enable backup. So the deployment of the recovery services vault along with the backup policy and the retention period is underway. It is going to take a couple of minutes, so I'll pause the video and will return back once the deployment is over. Okay, so the deployment is done. If you click on the notifications, it says the deployment of configure VM protection to resource group was successful. So it is done. What we can do is we can click on the VM and then scroll down, go to the backup again. We can minimize to have more space here, and you see that I have the backup pre-check as passed and last backup status is shown as a warning because it says that the initial backup is pending. If you look at the summary, it says that the recovery services vault is ATCSL vault, the one that we created while we were enabling the backup, and the backup policy is daily policy. So we are good with that. Now, if you want to take up the backup, you can just click on backup now. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to click on backup now, and it will tell you that you can retain the backup till 23rd/11/2020, which is just 1 month. You can just go ahead and change the date from here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the date to 1st of November 2020, which is 8 days from now, and click on OK. And if you look at the notifications again, it says triggering backup for VM1 and it is in progress. So the backup has already started and the trigger backup was successful. Once you trigger the backup, it is going to happen over the Azure Backbone network. So we are good with that. One thing worth mentioning here is all the activities that you do on Azure portal can also be done using the command line interface, which is the Azure CLI, or using the PowerShell commands. So as an administrator, you should be aware of how it needs to be done using CLI or PowerShell. So as an administrator, you must be aware of performing these activities using the Azure CLI or PowerShell, whatever you are comfortable with, because that gives you more options and that also creates a script that you can use multiple times instead of going to the Azure portal. And you can configure that with different variables and different options. But since this is a demo, I'm trying to do that using the Azure portal. So the backup job is in progress and we can monitor the backup jobs by going to the backup jobs page. So I will search for backup jobs. And if you see here, it says that the on-demand backup is in progress. So one of the on-demand backup shows as fail here because after starting the backup process, I reinitiated it and that was failed. It says that the another backup process is in progress. Wait for the on-demand backup which is in progress to be completed. So I will pause the video and return back once the backup is complete. So now we see that the on-demand backup is completed. So if I click on this one, it will show me that the on-demand backup was completed and I can click on it to have further details. So it says that transfer data to Vault is also successfully completed. What we can additionally do is we can go to the Recovery Services Vault and check the backup status from there as well. So I'll click on the search and then I'll go to Recovery Services Vault. And here you have the vault that we had created earlier. So I can click on it and I'll just minimize to have some more space. And if I go to backup here on the backup tab, scroll down, it says the backup items as 1. So I can click on this and have further details. So it says Azure Virtual Machine backup item count is 1 and we don't have any other backups. So we are good with it. So that concludes our demo on how to backup Azure Virtual Machine using Azure Backup. Let us now also discuss about the restoration of virtual machine data. As we had discussed earlier, you can either instantly restore from the snapshot tier or from the vault tier. There are different restore options. Let us discuss them one at a time now. The first one is create a new virtual machine. You can quickly create and get a basic VM up and running from a restore point. There is a caveat though, that the new VM must be created in the same region as the source VM. The second one is the restore a virtual machine disk. We can restore a virtual machine disk, which again can be then used to create a new VM. Basically, Azure Backup provides a template which can be used to customize and create a new VM. There are other ways as well. You can attach the disk to an existing VM or create a new VM. There might be questions as to why this option is useful. This actually helps in case you want to add a configuration setting that was not there when the backup was taken. We then have the replace a disk on the existing VM. We can also restore a disk and use it to replace an existing disk on a virtual machine. How it works is that Azure VM takes the snapshot of the existing VM and stores it in the staging location. The condition is that the VM must exist, else this option does not work. The fourth one is restore Azure VM in the secondary region. This option is used to restore the Azure VM in a secondary region, which is paired with the primary Azure region. This is only available for the first two options, that is create a new virtual machine or restore a virtual machine disk. And it does not support the third option, which we just discussed, about replacing a disk on the existing VM. Taking security into consideration, Azure Backup supports the backup and restoration of a virtual machine encrypted using Azure Disk Encryption, which works with the Azure Key Vault in order to manage the secrets and keys associated with the encrypted VM. You can have an additional layer of security as well on top of it if you want. For that, you can use the Key Vault encryption keys to encrypt the secret before it is written in the vault. Certain limitations apply when you restore encrypted virtual machines though. The first one is that the Azure Backup supports only standalone key encryption. Any key that's part of a certificate is not supported currently. File level or folder level restores are not supported with encrypted virtual machines. To restore to that level of granularity, the whole virtual machine has to be restored. You can then manually copy the file or the folders. And then the replace existing VM, which was the third option above, that option is not available for encrypted virtual machines. While restoration, individual files can also be restored from a recovery point once you mount the snapshot on the target machine using the iSCSI initiator in the machine. Okay, now it's time for a demo on restoration of Azure Virtual Machine data. Here, you will see how to restore a successful backup to replace a VM that has become corrupted and monitor its progress. So, let's get started. We are back on our Azure portal, and here the first thing we are going to do is create a storage account. What we are going to do is restore a virtual machine in the Azure portal, right? And for this, I need to create a storage account. Here, we are going to go for the third option, that is replace an existing disk. So what we are going to do is to create a staging environment. What it does is it takes the snapshot of the existing VM disk and places it in the storage account before restoring from the recovery point. So we are going to create the storage account, and then here on this page we'll click on add. Scroll down a little, choose the resource group, give this storage account a name. So these are the default values and I will not change any one of them. I will just click on networking. There is nothing to change here and I'll just click on review and create. Nothing fancy. So the deployment of the storage account is underway. And once the storage account gets created, we will start with the restoration of our virtual machine. The storage account has been deployed, and if you want, you can click on go to resource and check the details of the storage account. Now that the storage account is up and running, the next thing we are going to do is go to the virtual machines. So from here, I'll click on virtual machines, and we have one virtual machine already running. So I can click on VM1, scroll down a little, and click on the backup. Now, what we need to do is click on restore VM. But even before that, if we try to click on restore VM, it will definitely fail because the VM is currently up and running. What we need to do is go back to the overview tab and stop the VM before restoring the virtual machine. So the virtual machine is now stopping, and once completely stopped, I'll go back to the backup page and then try to restore the VM. So I'll pause the video and return back once the VM has completely stopped. Okay, now the VM has completely stopped. So I'll scroll down and under operations, I see the backup. I'll click on it, and once on that page, so I can click on restore VM. And from here, if you see, it is asking me for the restore point. I can click on select, and then I have two options here. I will choose the latest one, which is 10/25/2020, and click on OK. I will scroll down a little, and now here it is asking me for the restore configuration, whether you want to create a new VM or replace existing. So I will choose on replace existing, and if you remember, this was the third option from the restore types. So if you see here, it is not highlighted, but it says restore type is replace disks, and then staging location it is asking for, and that is the reason why I created the storage account. So before restoring the disks, what it will do is it will take the snapshot of an existing disk and put it in the staging account so that if there is a problem, it can be recovered. So I will choose ATCSL storage and then click on restore. And that's the only thing you need to do. And if you see here, it says that triggering restore for VM1 and the restore is in progress. And now it says that the restore triggered successfully. So we will wait for the restoration to happen. We can definitely track the progress of the restorations. So we can click on view all jobs. And here it says that the VM1 backup operation is in progress as well as the VM1 restore is in progress. So what happens is it first takes the backup, the snapshot of the existing disk, and then it restores from the recovery point. So we will wait for the process to be over and we'll get back once this is completed. In case you want to see further details, you can click on any one of the jobs and see where it exactly is. If I click on restore, it says that 17% of the job has already completed. So it shows the job progress and it says 10 minutes remaining. Under subtasks, it shows you the name of the job that is completed and that is in progress. It says that the transfer data from the vault is completed, which is 127 GB. And then it also says that update the virtual machine is in progress. So I'll scroll up a little and now it shows that the job progress is 99% completed. There you go. Now the restoration and the backup is completed. So if I click on the backup, it says that transfer data to the vault is also completed. I'll go back to backup jobs and click on restore. And it shows that the job progress is 100% complete. If I scroll down, it shows both the tasks, which is transfer data from vault and update the virtual machine, is also completed. We have our restoration completed and I can click on VM1. And now I can scroll up, click on overview and click on the start button again to start the virtual machine. So once I do that, a public IP address will get allocated once the VM is up and running and we will have our restored VM. So that concludes our demo on how to restore a VM from a recovery point. So finally, we are at the end of this module of understanding and implementing Azure Backups. We will first try to understand what Azure Backups are and its features and the different scenarios where applicable. We then had a demo on backing up an Azure virtual machine, followed by the restoration of the virtual machine data. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and if you do like it, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to motivate me to further create such content. In case you want to download this training material, you can go to azuretraining.com. The link is given at the bottom right corner. And you can follow me on Twitter at MSTechTrainings, and we can also connect on LinkedIn. Thank you again for watching, and until we meet next time, keep azuring.